Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Mr. Mayor of San Sebastian, representatives of society and other members, José Antonio Arraunz, the representatives of the group of victims and diversity, representatives, authorities, good morning. Good morning and welcome. And good morning also to everyone who is following this sixth and last social forum, those who are following us online and those who are here in person. Now, before we begin, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Eneko Goya, the Mayor of San Sebastian. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Goya, and the floor is all yours. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and I'd like to thank the Social Forum. I'd like to thank them. We're here at the sixth Social Forum. I'd like to thank them for inviting me to participate in this Social Forum to foster the peace process. And today is the last session. And I think we really do need to thank them for all their hard work. This isn't the end of anything. This is just a change of cycle. And I think I would like to take this opportunity to thank them from the bottom of my heart for all their hard work, everything that they have done since the forum was first established. Now, in the last report published in Durango, they took stock of the entire peace process, everything that had happened over these long years. And in this report, they described the major headway that has been made, or the advances that have been achieved, and how, in fact, many of these things we have been achieved are thanks to the people who have been involved in the social forum. But there is still a lot of work yet to be done, especially in the field of victims. We have much work still pending before we can recognize all victims without making a distinction between different types. We also have a lot of work that we still need to do in the case of people who are prisoners, who have been deported, who have been exiled. We are starting to make headway in bringing prisoners closer to home, but there's still a lot more work left to be done. There's still a lot of work to be done with regard to memory. We need to build an inclusive memory which will avoid this battle of the narratives. So thank you for all your hard work. But I also feel I have an obligation to say to all of you that this isn't the end of anything. We need to continue to work. We need to continue to work very hard in order to materialize all of these recommendations which have been emitted by the Social Forum. There's always something left to do, and in the future there will always be something left to do. Because as the report says, peace is a garden, and a garden needs to be watered. It needs to be watered and looked after constantly, both now and in the future. So thank you all very much once again for your contribution to this process, and I would like to encourage you to continue to look after this beautiful garden of peace. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yesterday, we held the first part of this sixth and last forum in Pamplona. And we said yesterday that one of the successes of the Permanent Social Forum over the last 7 years has been its working methodology, identifying points of conflict, learning from other international experiences, and making sensible proposals that will help to build new consensuses and new agreements. Yesterday, with Agus Hernan, Ainis Funosas, and Paul Rios, we learned how these agreements are built and how these sensible proposals can help to untie the knots that we thought were impossible to untie. Now, today, we're going to look back at some of the international experiences. Northern Ireland or South Africa, they've been our main references, but over recent years, as a peace process between the Colombian government and the FARC-EP has progressed, we have been increasingly guided by the experience of Colombia. There have been many witnesses to this process, including Sergio Jaramillo or the president of Colombia, Ernesto Samper. And today we have with us Gerson Ivan Arias Ortiz, who was the director of the social dialogue at the Colombian Truth Commission. And thanks to his presence, we will have the opportunity to learn about the reconciliation process in Colombia. So, Gerson, whenever you're ready, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Muy buenos días, muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation to be here with you in this social forum. It's an honor to be sharing my experience with all of you. Thanks to this kind invitation issued to me by the organizers, and I'm very grateful to be here in this very last permanent social forum meeting. I'm going to read my presentation, my address, because I don't want to get distracted and I want to really make the most of my time. I would like to greet very specially and very affectionately all the victims who are here with us and who have been a fundamental part of this process. In Colombia, after many attempts and many different ideas, we always come back to one basic idea. Reconciliation is a destination. As Lederach would say, reconciliation helps to guide, but it's not always possible to get there. In a society that has been torn apart by war, and in which, along with truth and trust, these have been the main victims, the horizon of reconciliation often becomes an imaginary that doesn't seem to convince very many, or at least it doesn't seem to motivate the bulk of society. And I think that you can see that. You'll be able to see that if you ever go to Colombia. When we were in the Truth Commission, whose mandate we began in November 2018, and in fact we ended in August 2022, one of the first tasks we set ourselves was to understand that part of the spirit of what was agreed in the final peace agreement with the FARC guerrillas, which was the origin of this commission, which told us that the work of the commission should, and I quote, contribute to creating structural conditions for coexistence among Colombians and to lay the foundations, to lay the groundwork for non-repetition, reconciliation, and the construction of a stable and lasting peace, end quote. Indeed, the legal name of the commission was the Commission for the Clarification of Truth, Coexistence and Non-Repetition. And many understood that this idea of reconciliation was just an aspiration, and that we should be prudent and preserve the notion of peaceful coexistence because the word in question, within a commission led by a Jesuit priest, a symbol of peace building in Colombia, Francisco Herrún, could have a religious connotation. And many people didn't want anything to do with that. And also because it seemed like a very long-term goal. And in the end, in addition to the notion of peaceful coexistence, the Commission adopted the concept of positive moving to define a middle ground, sort of a middle lane, and to define the kind of effect that we wanted to generate in society and in institutions. And I think this is what is said. This is what is said in our final report. Our aim was to generate a kind of a positive shock that would mobilize Colombian society towards an imaginary shared future, which was focused on reconciliation. Now, I mention this to reaffirm right from the very beginning that after so many years of war, and at least 10 final peace agreements, including a historic one with the FARC guerrillas signed in 2016, after at least 76,000 people who have individually or collectively left the armed groups in the last 22 years, and after nearly 9.5 million victims, in my opinion, Colombia is still debating the very idea of reconciliation and how it can be realized in society. Some might argue that this debate is in fact a hallmark, a hallmark of identity of a so-called democratic society. And I think they would be right. But it distresses me, and let me use that term, it distresses me that with all this progress that we've made, we still have black and white view of the world with very little nuances, very little understanding of what reconciliation actually means as a destination, as a point of arrival. Now, after this short introduction, I would like to focus this presentation on 4 elements that I hope will be useful and will give you some food for thought, and which are based on our experience and on our journey. All these elements have, as their context, 3 events that have marked the recent history of my country. So I'm speaking about our immediate history that I experienced. I'm talking about the final peace agreement of 2016 and the reincorporation into civilian life of more than 14,000 people from the FARC guerrillas. After a secret process that lasted for 2 years and then another process that lasted for 4 years. And again, this is, and also the social unrest that in late 2020 and early 2021 prompted thousands of young people to go out and protest. And this undoubtedly changed part of the political landscape of society and reopened very deep wounds in our society, especially in the relationship between society and public forces. And I would like to offer a few thoughts based on my own experiences. So first of all, let's look at the final peace and reconciliation agreement. The final agreement with the FARC is above all an agreement that aims to ensure the non-repetition of the armed conflict and marks the consolidation of a long peace-building process. Now, it was the best possible agreement at that time. It meant the withdrawal of more than 9,000 weapons from the war, the transition to legality of more than 14,000 combatants, and the implementation of measures for social transformation in many regions of the country, or at least their planning based on a minimum degree of consensus, because at the moment we are in a critical moment with regard to the implementation of this agreement. In the 310-page final agreement, reconciliation is a concept that is mentioned across the board as an aim that supports the development of the different components of the agreement. Of course, we're not so naive as to assimilate peace to a written text signed by the government and a guerrilla group. It's much more than that, of course. But we should just remember that the process, it was based right at the beginning on the idea of the end of the conflict as an opportunity to build peace. And obviously society will have a big part to play in that. Let's have a look at some examples so that you can understand this cross-cutting nature of the idea of reconciliation. So reconciliation is understood as the final purpose, the ultimate aim of the peace agreement and its endorsement process. It's the goal of a national reconciliation to build a new paradigm of development and territorial well-being. It's also mentioned in many different areas of the agreement. It's also mentioned within the vision of the agreement on reincorporation and with the agreement on security guarantees. It's also mentioned in point 4 as one of the objectives of the Comprehensive National Programme for the Substitution of Illicit Crops. Now, we know that there are many, many hectares of cocaine crops, and this needs to be replaced. It's understood as one of the guiding principles of the Victims' Agreement, and it's mentioned as one of the aims of the integrated system of truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-repetition. It's mentioned as a guiding criterion of the Truth Commission in the search to strengthen respect and tolerance and guarantee of human rights. So reconciliation is an aspiration, and it's also a destination of the final peace agreement. So it's a possibility that needs to be worked for in order to ensure the end of the war and the decision to stop carrying out politics with weapons. It's also necessary to state the obvious, which is often forgotten, and that is that the notion of reconciliation that appears in this agreement has 3 very relevant features. First of all, it's not just a reconciliation between former guerrilla fighters and the state. Secondly, it's not a new element. There are many different exercises in the past, and we've seen that in the Commission. And third, it's a recognition of the work of hundreds of organizations and thousands of leaders who have given their lives in order to get us to this destination. Now, I'd also like to look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In the work of the Truth Commission, reconciliation was understood as a result of multiple processes whose prerequisite was to reach basic levels of peaceful coexistence, defined under the idea of democratic peaceful coexistence, which started based on a basic assumption. Quote, war has been inscribed in our bodies, territories, and relationships, deepening imaginaries, representations, and practices in which stereotypes are constructed in relation to the other, the antagonist, the historical enemy of always. Close quote. Under this dimension, the Commission was able to map 1,008 experiences of peaceful coexistence that took place within the framework of the armed conflict and promoted a great agreement for peaceful coexistence, among other actions. There were different initiatives, for example, naming the unnameable, stories for changing history, which aim to tell the story of these heroes that don't appear in many books, but nevertheless change the lives of many, many people in many areas. So we could see that in the midst of bullets and massacres and disappearances, there were people and institutions, this is very important, that made a firm commitment to peaceful coexistence and reconciliation. This is an invitation to recognize everything that these people have done. Another dimension in which reconciliation appeared were in the 58 processes of recognition, 40 of them processes of acknowledgement of responsibility, which occurred within an extrajudicial framework, which enabled people to actually access some kind of justice within the peace agreement. These actions involved 1,111 people, 723 victims, 150 perpetrators, paramilitaries, guerrilla war fighters, state agents, and 238 people who we call moral witnesses. And they really helped with these conversations and these dialogues. Now, I would just like to mention two of them that took place in the northeastern region of Catatumbo, on the border with Venezuela. The first, that was Army Major Mauricio Llorente. And in fact, I had the opportunity to actually meet him. He was condemned to 40 years in prison, and he just had 2 years to go before he was granted parole. And he, I think, could have said this. He could have said no. He could have said he wasn't going to participate in this process. So Army Major Mauricio Llorente in 1999 facilitated the raid and carried out the first 3 massacres carried out by paramilitary groups in this region. After 2 years of complex work, the victims' families and this former member of the army sat face to face in Cartagena. So he sat down with victims' families. They were in a private space far away from Catatumbo because, in fact, none of the victims had ever seen the sea. And there I could see the seeds of what reconciliation might mean. Truth, genuine recognition, and a process of care, especially in terms of psychosocial care. I remember the faces of Jessica and Lorena. I'd like to mention them. They've given me their permission. Jessica was Henry's wife, and Lorena was Jorge Camillo's daughter. Both of these men were killed in the massacres of 29th of May and the 17th of July, 1999, respectively. Now, both of these women at the beginning were very hesitant. They didn't want to participate. They didn't believe that this was going to be possible. And then later, the transformation began and a new phase in their lives opened up. And for me, this was a very important experience. The second experience was a process which lasted more than a year, in which 2 survivors and relatives of 34 coca leaf collectors. Now, this is important because the FARC, guerrilla fighters, carry out lots of massacres there. So anyway, so these 34 coca leaf collectors met with members of the FARC guerrillas who were responsible for the massacre of these people in the village of La Gabarra in June 2004. In fact, some of them even had their throats slit. And all this happened within the context of a bloody war between the guerrillas, the paramilitaries, and the security forces in the region. I also remember the faces of Wilson and Esteban, two of the survivors who listened to the explanations of the FARC, and they're asking for forgiveness. This, again, was another seed of reconciliation that I witnessed, another unrepeatable experience. So these processes have really changed the reality of many people's lives, and I was able to witness that. I was able to witness this social dimension. Another dimension of reconciliation in the work of the Truth Commission was the dialogue processes for non-repetition and the spaces that were set up for listening. In 2019, we carried out 6 processes of dialogue on threats to social leaders. And between 20 and 2021, we carried out 4 dialogue processes focusing on non-repetition and the non-continuation of the conflict. There, many stakeholders, many of them who'd never sat down together before, managed to agree on a series of basic principles. All this violence happened, and it did happen, and because it happened, we must work for it never to happen again. And in that effort, it's very important to recognize the other. And in that difference, we need to find understanding and come to agreement to have no more weapons. Likewise, under the listening spaces methodology, between 2020 and 2022, the Truth Commission carried out a total of 66 of these initiatives of listening spaces. They were created with the aim of allowing the free expression of people's experiences, emotions, and visions, especially of those talking about what happened during the armed conflict. With this methodology, the Commission listened in depth to many people, including female victims of sexual and reproductive violence, the LGBTIQ plus population, children, adolescents, and elderly people with disabilities, journalists, indigenous guards, ethnic peoples, armed forces, the national police, victims who were members of these institutions, representatives of different faith communities, people who were exiled, and representatives of political parties affected by crimes such as kidnapping, among many, many other stakeholders.
And this is very important because each of these listening processes was a very, very different and unique process. When we talked with the widows of members of the army and of the police, they were surprised by the fact that the commission would reach out to them. And I remember that first they always asked to listen to Colombia's national anthem. And that's something that we had to do at the beginning of each listening space or listening process. It is worth remembering, in general, what the scale of participation in the work of the Truth Commission meant. 15,000 individual and collective interviews, both domestically and with the Colombians in exile in 23 countries. We were able to listen directly to almost 30,000 people. There were in total 730 cases that were investigated and 1,195 reports of acts of violence. The goal of this listening was to heal, another of the guiding criteria for moving towards the point of destination of reconciliation. All of these processes were references within a horizon of reconciliation. Above all, because we understood the Truth Commission as a social process, not just a way of shedding light on truth and what had happened. This was an instrument of transitional justice to reduce the possible range of lies, denialism, after long periods of silence and violence against all kinds of victims. We understood that its main political task revolved around 2 axes. First, to build an inclusive narrative that would allow us to recognize what had happened and at the same time share a vision of why the legacy of past violations must be confronted in order to ensure that this never happens again. And we also wanted to open up a debate and a public reflection on the non-repetition and non-continuity of the conflict. We wanted to generate a positive shock in society. In other words, so we wanted people to rethink their future by reconsidering their past, to move from a time in which violence and victimization of the other was normal, common practice, and move towards a time which sympathy, empathy, and awareness of rights characterize relationships. This is critical if we want to move towards reconciliation. Ultimately, reconciliation was, in the context of the Truth Commission, a destination. But this requires truth, genuine recognition, a myriad of spaces for dialogue and active listening. And we need to leave to aside those single unique narratives. We also, of course, need to provide a great deal of psychological and social support. Third, we need to refer to the social unrest and reconciliation. From the end of 2020 and during the first half of 2021, the country led to one of the most impressive social mobilizations, mainly led by young people, something unseen during at least 40 years. This was triggered by a series of decisions made by President Duque, and in particular, the rejection of a series of tax, health, and labor and pension reform bills. The process, the demonstrations intensified due to the unwillingness of the government to listen and to use indiscriminate force. And during these demonstrations, at least 46 people were killed, 44 civilians, and 2 police officers. And these are the official figures. And one epicenter of these mobilizations was the city of Cali in Colombia's Pacific region. A couple of weeks ago, I myself was able to witness a first meeting between 9 policemen who participated in those demonstrations and 14 demonstrators, in a process led by the Social Pastoral of the Catholic Church in Cali with the support of the U.S. Institute for Peace, where I work part-time. The wounds were still open, and despite the short time, I found there are several expressions that point towards the beginning of a possible path of reconciliation: truth, honesty, listening, caring for others, giving priority to listening, respecting pain, speaking without judging and without being judged, trust, respect, willingness. I'm quoting some of the participants in this meeting. Reconciliation in this context is a possibility that needs to be worked on with care, with a great deal of listening, with patience, with dialogue, with truth, with mutual recognition. And last, I'd like to share with you some reflections, some final thoughts. And I apologize for taking a lot of your time, but for me, it was very important to share my thoughts on reconciliation with you. You need to understand that there are other views on what happened in Colombia. I would like to share some thoughts on reconciliation in Colombia. And it goes without saying that you probably identify with many of the things I'm going to say now. After such a painful, heartbreaking war that shattered many lives, and by a part of society that decided to look away, just think of the extermination of an entire political party such as the Patriotic Union, the recruitment of at least 60,000 children, the forced disappearance of more than 1,000 children. And the truth is that many parts of society decided to look to a different direction. I would like to share some reflections on reconciliation, and we cannot deny what happened. This is very important, that we do not deny or question what has happened. And we need to shed light on reality in order to give visibility to trauma. This horizon of reconciliation must be between the victims on all sides, those that are responsible on all sides, and between the state and society. This has different levels, different understandings, different pains, feelings, and dispositions. And of course, understanding is made between different people. As Ledrak said, reconciliation in its deepest sense means that we have rebuilt our relations and we are able to cooperate, to understand together, to work together in unison. We lack this horizon that tells us that it is possible to walk in unison, even though we do not always achieve what we would like to. Secondly, we have learned that the road towards reconciliation begins with recognizing the other, with a dialogue, with coexistence. Colombia still needs many dialogues for us to truly understand the importance of this destination. These dialogues require a process logic, willingness, preparation, and understanding and empathetic interlocutors. This is something that we have understood through time. I'm sure you have as well. In other words, we need to understand the psychosocial trauma that has shaped the lives of so many. Thirdly, we have learned that the road towards reconciliation calls for a series of conditions to stop violence, to stop justifying violence, to stop associating arms and politics. As I heard in the recent dialogue between protesters and policemen, this happens because the other doesn't accept who we are, what we believe in, and what we think. We need to have a broader understanding of what happened to those that are in front of us. To walk together this path of reconciliation, we need the presence of leaders. And this is extremely important. And I'd like to draw your attention on this idea. Leaders who concentrate their efforts on convening spaces for dialogue, insisting on the notion of inclusion, and who can focus their feelings, ideas, and capabilities on the effects are possibilities of transformation instead of the causes of what happened in order to move towards reconciliation. In the commission, I worked under the premise mentioned yesterday in Pamplona that it would be very hard to agree on why some things happened, and it would be less difficult and easier to think together a different future that doesn't justify the use of violence without persecutions because we think differently, a space where we are able to peacefully coexist. We must be convinced that the horizon of reconciliation needs more citizens than victims, and I'm being controversial here. It's not that we need to erase this category. I'm just saying that for the Colombian experience, the notion of victims can be loaded with a legal connotation or nuance that does not allow for the basics to happen, that does not allow us to understand beyond the context of human rights, an essential area of work, of course, for any democracy. And this can be frustrating. This can led us to think that things won't change. In other words, social and political movements of all ideological positions must transform inflexible attitudes in order for reconciliation to happen and for it to be part of our agendas. We have understood that the psychosocial dimension is unescapable to walk the path towards reconciliation, and I've mentioned this repeatedly during my presentation. This means that we cannot accelerate nor oversimplify the spaces and actions designed to move towards the point of destination. And in Colombia, for example, we have seen that art and culture are very, very valuable tools, and we need to engage women, the youth. We have understood that the great statements of reconciliation based on public policies are not sufficient to make reconciliation a possibility. Micro-transformations and the search for small bridges, may be the longest and most winding road, but perhaps also the most sustainable one. And reconciliation experiences have an important demonstration effect, and they are very symbolic. However, it may seem that the track of national reconciliation is not the same as that of reconciliation at a micro level. Transformation as at a micro level may be cumulative, but they do not necessarily add up to what we call national reconciliation. UNRIME talks about moving from a path of uses and abuses of the notion of reconciliation to a new approach. We have seen that the paramilitary groups use this concept, and many people have been labeled by some as saboteurs of peace because they have tried to impose their views on reconciliation. We need to focus on rights, on forgiveness. And I'd like to wrap up by saying that the main challenge we face in Colombia is to ensure the free exercise of the leftist party in power. And of course, the possibility of dissenting needs to be an option regarding what we call total peace. It's very important that there are new paths towards reconciliation, always based on truth, justice, reparation, regardless of who is in power. And this is a message that is clear in the mind of victims. Reconciliations needs to be embedded in public policies. It's very important that society appropriates this concept, and this is the ultimate goal at the end of the day. And the end agreement, we foresaw a national political covenant, and there was a decree that was enacted last year. And last year, the Commission of Truth, as part of its recommendations, proposed that a Ministry for Peace and Reconciliation be set up. But the local and territorial processes for reconciliation continue walking the road that has been in the works for some years. Reconciliation is a destination that calls for efforts, heart, methodology, preparation. It's not just a matter of will or disposition, but above all, it needs a certain level of intolerance and rejections of those who seek to defend political ideas through force or through arms. Today, part of the challenge we face is how to promote a reconciliation agenda when violence is still present both in the territories and imaginaries. There are 8,000 people, armed individuals that are part of organized groups. And I'd like to finish with a set of questions. Is reconciliation an accumulative process? Does it depend on a specific landmarks like peace processes? What guarantees its sustainability? Is it really useful and effective to turn it into a public policy? We're still trying to shed light on all these questions, and today I leave fully convinced that you have some answers to these questions. I really admire the path, the road you have traveled. You have been an example and an inspiration for us in Colombia. Thanks very much.
Muchas gracias, Gerson.
Thanks very much, Gerson. Those final thoughts and messages are very inspiring for us for this new stage that we're opening here in Euskal Herria. Yesterday in Iruña, we stated that the Permanent Social Forum was presented to society in October 2016 after a reflection process that started after the third social forum on disarmament. Since then, individuals and groups that have participated in this permanent social forum have been working and unizing in order to, in an inclusive and horizontal manner, work around 4 axes and 12 recommendations that were issued after the first social forum that took place in 2013 and that was organized by Locarri and Baque Videa. The first line of work was to design, develop, and culminate a process of dismantling and disarmament. Secondly, we wanted to facilitate the integration of prisoners and those that were in exile. Third, we wanted to promote and ensure human rights. And fourth, we wanted to preserve truth and memory in order to address the past with honesty and to set solid foundations for future peaceful coexistence. The sixth and last, the social forum, allows us to take stock on what we have accomplished and to continue working and to work on these lines of work. This social forum decided to set a structure. The Batzorde Iraunkorra, or the Permanent Commission, and the Gogo Etavides, or working groups that have been working on the different lines of work. Regarding disarmament and disbanding, we have given the floor to Checha Cheveri, an artisan of peace. And recently, he has been told that 7 years later, he needs to appear before a judge for doing what states were unable or incapable of doing. And that's why I ask you to please give him a round of applause.
Y junto a sus testimonios,
And we're going to listen to his testimony. And I'd like to invite to the remaining participants to the stage Aizpea, Leizaola, Aitzol, Asla, Mariluz Esteban, Chemi Periz, and this roundtable will be chaired by Tasio Arrizabalaga. Welcome, everybody.
Entzuten da? Hasi aurretik nahiko nuke ohar bat eman, Txetxek bere hitzartzea frantsesez egingo du. Orduan
Well, Chech will take the floor in French. I don't know if everyone has his or her interpreting device. If you need them, you can pick up a device at the entrance of the room. Well, we're ready. First of all, I'd like to thank you. Thank you all for participating and for joining us today. In this round table, we're going to be talking about the role played by the social forum. The peace-building process in Euskal Herria has been nurtured by the contribution of many of the members of the social forum and the permanent committee, and also members of the civil society. And in a peace-building process, the engagement of society, civil society, is extremely important in order to consolidate the process, and so that society can feel that its own process. The permanent social forum was created in June 2016, and since then has enjoyed the participation of 18 stakeholders that have participated in the forum. And we see that not only organizations, but many individuals have participated in this forum. A series of working groups have addressed the different lines of work and have been working hard since 2016. These working groups are called Gogo Etabit. These are teams that have reflected together, and the way they have been working has changed through time in order to cater for the needs identified at each moment in time. These working groups have been addressing issues like disarmament. There's another working group that has been working on the needs of prisoners, those in exile. We have been also working on memory, truth. We've also had a feminist working group, and in Navarra, there has been an ad hoc working group addressing some specific topics, and today we're going to engage in a dialogue with the representatives or the chairs of the different working groups that are going to explain to us what work they've done, what they believe are the key takeaways, how they see the situation at this moment in time. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's panelists. We enjoy the presence of Aizpea Leizaola, who holds a PhD in anthropology. She did her PhD dissertation on the Basque Country, and more specifically the political borders in Basque Country from the standpoint of territoriality. She has also researched the Civil War. She teaches anthropology at the University of the Basque Country, and Aizpea has also promoted victims' rights in the context of the social forum. We also enjoy the presence of Aitzol Asla, lawyer in criminal law and professor of civil procedural law in the School of Law. In the social forum, he has been working on prisoners and refugees, and he'll give us his views on the outcomes of this working group. Mr. Echeverri is an activist from Baja Navarra. He's also a member of trade union ELA, and he is an activist of ALA. And Mr. Echeverri has participated in the creation of a series of social movements, among them La Orranza Gambera. In 2016, he was arrested by police forces in Luso when he was going to participate in a neutralizing event of ETA's arsenal. He was doing preparatory work. After broad citizen mobilization, he was released, he was freed, and since then he has become a role model. And he's part of the Artisans of Peace movement that participated actively in the disarmament of ETA. He will share with us his views on the lessons drawn during this period. Chemi Perez joins us today as well. He's a member of the Navarre Permanent Social Forum. He participates in the Christian Navarre networks, and he has been the representative of this organization in the Permanent Forum. And for a year, he has been a witness of the experiences. He has launched an initiative called Diálogo de Vivencias. We also enjoy the presence of Mariluz Esteban, who holds a PhD in social anthropology. She's also an expert in medical anthropology. She's a feminist, and she's a professor of social anthropology at the University of the Basque Country. She's a member of the feminist working group of the Social Forum, and Mariluz will be reflecting on feminist justice and the conversations they have had in this working group during this time. I'm going to give them the floor one by one, and I'll ask each of you to share with us your experience in these working groups that were set up in the context of the social forum. What do you believe are the main milestones, the main landmarks? Aizpea, you can take the floor first. Thanks very much. Tasha, can you hear me? Well, yes. Well, over the past days, much has been said. We've mentioned repeatedly that the social forum has been able to create a very specific and unique working methodology and culture. Yesterday in Iruña, we underscored this several times, and Tasio, in his presentation, made this very clear as well. And I'd like to insist on this. Gogota Videa is an initiative of victims who are active listening, and I'd like to remind you the origin. There are three key words. Gogota Videa encompasses three concepts. Gogota Videas was the consequence of a terminological task. We had this need of creating new terms, new words. In this working group called Gogota Videa, we had two main lines of work, memory and victims. And I'm going to focus on victims. In 2016, the Social Forum became a permanent standing body, and since then we have met at least once per month. We have worked hard with very structured and clearly defined agendas, and we have had a very heterogeneous team. We had individuals from the world of gender activism, and since the very beginning of this permanent social forum, as established in the recommendations, it was very important for victims to have their own space in order to build their own peace-building process. These are people that have suffered the consequences of violence, and they play a central role, and they continue to play this role. When we talk about victims, it needs to be clear in our mind that these are very different people with different identities, different circumstances, different personalities. When I talk about circumstances, I'm thinking about the kind of violence they have suffered, they have endured. Some have been recognized by the institutions, by society, others haven't. People from different generations, men, women, people that don't identify themselves with these categories. So people, with very different experiences and backgrounds. And we need to understand that they all fall under the category of victims. But we're talking about a highly diverse people. This is something that needs to be considered. And when we started working, we understood that all these people's needs had to be considered. In 2016, perhaps not at a social level, but at an institutional level, this wasn't the case. There was a huge divide when it came to looking after the victims. Also in legal terms, we saw significant differences. We saw that society reacted very differently depending on the kind of violence that these people had suffered. There were very different approaches to victims depending on the kind of violence these victims had endured. Back then we talked about human rights violations, and the social forum decided to consider the criterion of this violation of human rights, but we wanted to go a step ahead and go beyond the context of human rights, because all these people shared this pain they felt, this suffering. All these people had the right to truth, justice, and reparation, and therefore, with this in mind, we started working. And Goroita Vida in this working group. And we started working hard. And since then, other working groups have been set up. And for them and for us, words, terminology was very important. We wanted to use international terminology. We wanted to mainstream this terminology to lay the groundwork, lay the foundations, and we understood that was very important for us to acknowledge our spaces, and we wanted to get the ball rolling. And it's true that it was very, very hard initially to step out of our comfort zone, out of what was known to us. And there was a need of stepping out of that comfort zone, but it was extremely complicated. And this called for, an openness, need to open up to new ways of thinking, new ways of listening to each other, new ways of working together in unison.
So once we'd established our guiding principles, having told you what they were, I'd now like to analyze and to describe the 4 areas that we have focused on. First of all, we have the integrated map of suffering. That's the name we gave to it. And it was set up in April 2017. At that time, we had, by that time, we'd already organized a series of events. For example, coinciding with the anniversary of the bombing of Guernica. And so for the first time, well, I think it was for the first time, at least, we invited publicly, these people to participate in what had until that time been known as local forum. So we invited these people to come and share their experiences. Now, looking back, this seems fairly easy, fairly obvious, something that was, fairly simple to do, but it wasn't at the time. But we did believe it was necessary. Because I think it really was a continuation of everything that we'd done before with other organizations, other institutions. So it was a necessary step. It was also necessary because we believed that all these people wanted to participate. Because these were just normal people. And we thought it was very important to allow normal people to participate. So a series of activities were organized to coincide with the anniversary of the bombing of Guernica. And at our working group, what we did was to coordinate this participation. It wasn't even management, really. It was just the coordination. We coordinated the participation of these people who came to talk about their experiences. It was a really interesting moment. It was a really interesting experience because these people, they had a comfort zone within in the forums, and we broke away from all of that. We broke away from the smaller areas of comfort to make up a larger area of comfort, a more shared communal comfort zone. There were people who felt very comfortable in a smaller, very private type of forum, actually took the leap and started to participate in a much more public, larger forum. And we were able to compile our integrated map of suffering. And we followed an experimental methodology, which was the fruit of a lot of teamwork. We spent a lot of time in the working group, thinking about this, deciding how we were going to do it, what it was going to look like, seeing how we could, overcome these points of conflict so that everybody would feel comfortable. It was a very deep-rooted exercise of empathy. And because we had some different categories of pain as a result of violence. But when we were compiling the map, we realized that we had to go one step further. There were different types of pain, suffering, human rights violations, which were very evident, very patent. But there were other types that were had been silenced in society, and we needed to render them visible. I'm not going to explain the entire methodology because I don't have time, but what we did was we randomly divided ourselves up into groups. We didn't know who was going to be in which group. We knew that we knew who was there, who'd put their names down, but we didn't know who was going to be in which group. And in fact, it was only on the very day that we knew whether the people who put their names down were actually turned up or not. So I was in one of the groups. In the group that I was in, there was a person who said that they were a member of ETA. And sitting next to them, there was another person who said that he was sort of a mid-level officer of the Ertzaina, which is the Basque police force. They were sitting next to each other. I remember in that group, there was a very healthy conversation, a kind of an exercise of mutual listening. It was really quite incredible. And the second area of work was the work we carried out in Navarre. I think we'll hear a little bit more about this a little bit later on. But symbolically and practically as well, we held these sessions in the Parliament building of Navarre, in sort of what would be the House of Commons of Navarre. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm going to try and go a bit quicker and just sum up a bit more. But third of all, we had an effort to build peaceful coexistence through active listening with 23 different meetings with 67 different victims of different types of violence, different origins. And there were people who had already spoken in a public forum, and for other people it was the first time they'd done so. And they really were quite unique experiences, and they really did, they were a turning point. I think, for the process. And as a member of the forum, I'll never tire of thanking each and every one of these 67 people, thanking them for their generosity, thanking them for their effort, because it had such a huge repercussion at a collective level. I have to thank them for leaving their comfort zone and for making the effort to sit down opposite another person, the other person who, until a very, very short time before, had been their enemy, or had been the person that they would have just crossed the street to avoid. So this exercise of sitting down, talking, listening to each other for the collective good, that is something that I will never tire of thanking them for. Now, these meetings weren't just held here in the Basque Country. They were held in Barcelona, in Madrid, etc. And the forum, since it became a permanent social forum, has really broadened its gaze and become better known, not just in Basque society, but also in Spain, and, as Gerson said as well, at an international level too. And finally, the last initiative that I'd like to mention was called Ustakabean Topo, so unexpected encounters. It's when you bump into somebody unexpectedly. And this is something that we set up after having listened to different international experiences. So we're aware that we have our own process, we have our own experiences, but that there are many other places that have gone through processes which have lasted a lot longer than ours in some cases. And it's important to learn from them. And as part of that, we organize different international experiences with organizations, with victims of different kinds. But victims of conflict, and they were still talking about the two sides. We brought together victims, people who had worked in peace processes, and during the pandemic as well, with all the restrictions we had to abide by, we continued with this sort of work. We had meetings with different stakeholders from here, from the Basque Country, and different people from the forum and the different working groups. We worked to pay tribute to different victims. And this, I believe, has helped us to build this mutual trust. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. Right, we'll pass the floor now to Aitzol. Aitzol is going to talk about what you have done with prisoners, people who are exiled, what you've done from the Beatoki, the observatory. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be here to talk to you. Thank you also to all the stakeholders involved for all your hard work, very important work that you have been engaged in. I'm sure that we will continue to learn a lot from each other. I'm going to speak in Spanish now because I speak Spanish better than I speak Basque. So if you will allow me, I will continue in Spanish. So let me just sum up in 4 different points the work that we have carried out in the field of prison policy and the rights of prisoners, and how all of this has evolved, because we think that we have made quite a lot of headway. So let's just go in chronological order. It's important to get an idea of the context. So back in 2014, when the FPKK started an internal debate and started to think about how we can move towards the reintegration of prisoners in the ordinary prison policy, which is what we want to be applied. We don't want an exceptional prison policy to be applied to prisoners. We want a normal prison policy. So in 2007, we finished our debate and we started to take our first steps. At the time, there were 314 people who were being held prisoner for political reasons. Now, we had a new president at the time in Spain, Mr. Pedro Sánchez, and he announced at the time his intention to modify prison policy, which was putting so many obstacles in the path of prisoners who wanted to access less strict regimes. So we had 249 of all the people who were in prison were being held in prison very, very far away from the Basque Country and Navarre. We're talking about 2018 here. We're talking about 2/3 of all political prisoners were being held over 600 kilometers away from the Basque Country or Navarre. In 2019, after 16 cases in which there were 16 cases in which prisoners were brought closer to home. Now, 2019 and 2020, we know that the pandemic hit, and we know that this was a very, very difficult time for everyone, especially for prisoners and their family members. And I'm not saying it was an excuse, but for whatever reasons, there was a sort of a halt in the procedures. 13%. So we had 13% of the prisoners in the Basque Country, 38% 400 kilometers away, and 29% less than 200 kilometers away. So some headway had been made, but not as quickly as we had all hoped. In 2021, there were 92 prisoners. There were 21 of the 92 from belonged to Navarre. 21 were in France. A few years later, this number had gone down to 12. And I'm just giving you a lot of facts and figures, just to give you an idea of how this has evolved. In 2023, and this is the latest report. This is what the data in the latest report. Of 172 total, 150 are in the Basque Autonomous Community, 10 are nearby, and 2 are in France. And 5 people had been deported, and there were some other people who were still living in exile, which is something else that is pending. So we can see that some headway is being made, but more headway needs to be made. And after a major effort by all parties involved, I think that we are finally seeing some results. So what have been the steps that have been taken in the process? Well, prison policy has always been one of the 3 main areas of conflict that we need to overcome. One is recognition of victims of all violence, the application of the ordinary prison policy, ordinary prison legislation to political prisoners, and the third area would be to work on establishing an inclusive memory that with guarantees of non-repetition, which is what we've heard before from our friend from Colombia. Now, the 4th social forum focused on prison policy. It also focused on people who have been deported and who are in exile. The second part was held in 2018, and we presented our conclusions in order to try to facilitate the reintegration of the people who were refugees or who had been exiled. And we had a document that was called the Contribution of Civil Society. And again, I say, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the ordinary prison policy is applied, because this will automatically deactivate the exceptional laws and regulations which are still applied to political prisoners here in Spain. All of this is joined together. We have to have the ordinary legislation, because that will automatically nullify the exceptional regulations that were applied. Because, as we legal experts say, laws are applied in accordance with the social reality of any moment. But this is what we're pushing for, and it is happening, but very slowly. We also focused on the different powers that are devolved to the regional Basque government, because not all of this devolution of powers has been completed, although headway again is being made in this sense. We also carried out a discrete work, constant round of contacts to try to agree, to reach micro agreements in specific issues. For example, with prisoners who are ill, a consensus with regard to put an end to isolation. And I think all the different institutional and civil operators were agreeing on that. And in fact, the Parliament has made an announcement on this, and in very public arenas, public figures have talked about this. So we fostered contact between institutions, forums, and trade unions, always trying to put what we agree, focusing on what we agree on rather than on our differences. And again, this was interrupted by the pandemic, but although work did continue. And indeed, we were supported by a vast social majority. A social majority that was in favour of all of this. Now, the process has encountered different difficulties. There's been moments of crisis. But I think that this process has helped us to get where we are today. We did reach agreements in 2021 about what we call the ongi etorris, which are sort of the welcome parties that villages throw to a prisoner when they are let out of prison. Of course, we should highlight the role played by the prisoners themselves in this dynamic, because they are the true protagonists of this. When we're talking about prison policy, it's the prisoners who really have an important role to play. And I have had much contact with many prisoners since I've been working with the Behatokia, and I've seen how willing they are and how committed they are to this process. Now, I'm not saying that there haven't been and there aren't still legal obstacles in the way. By 2020, there were no longer people who were kept in isolation, solitary confinement. There was one person in Córdoba, I think one of the last one. And I remember talking to the director of the prison in Córdoba, and we were able to resolve that situation, and that was very important. So little by little, with the transfers, the prisoners moved up sort of to access different regimes, first degree, second degree, which means that they're a much less, the first degrees are strictest, the third degrees are less strict, for example. So they were able to access less strict, more lax regimes. But there were different legal obstacles as a result of the courts here. There were a number of different things that we had to overcome. Now, there was a lobby, a very idealized lobby, which had a lot of weight in the media with some victims' associations. And this lobby started to make a lot of noise. And they made a lot of noise because they saw that the change was about to actually happen. So that's when they really went into action and decided to make more noise. And well, they're still at it now because they have a lot of influence today. 2021, that was the year in which penitentiary powers were decentralized to the Basque regional government. And third-degree regimes were awarded, which is the less strict regime, to different prisoners. Always after having filed the proper files and reports. However, and this is one of the most important obstacles in the path, the National Court, the Public Prosecutor's Office, and the place where all the different appeals get examined, because of course we're talking about the entire judicial system in which we're always dealing with the same people because they end up, just moving around the different posts. But that whole judicial apparatus continued to refuse these requests to attain third-degree regimes. And in fact, legislation was being applied incorrectly. So they weren't always applying the same criteria. And they continue to do that today. And then we'll see in the conclusions what some possible solutions may be for this. But as I said, there are still problems. We always use the same example. How can you possibly reject a request to have a day pass because there's a danger of recidivism when you think, well, how's that going to happen if it no longer exists? So, a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure you all read that the Supreme Court was talking about a doctrine that wasn't being applied to political prisoners, but was being applied to normal prisoners. And they said that even if there's an appeal, there's no way we can have a third degree. So this is something new. They're just looking for new ways of hampering the procedure and for preventing anyone from attaining a third degree. So, just to finish, a couple of words about Behatokia, because that was what its aim was. Its aim was to collect data, judicial reports, testimonies from professionals, both in Spain and abroad, in order to try to draw a faithful picture of the reality, of the actual situation, of what was really going on. We gave talks in Madrid. It was very successfully achieved. We went to the regional parliaments in Andalusia and in Córdoba. And everything that we wrote in Spanish because we wanted to tell Spain about this situation, but from a very technical, from a very legal perspective. And I think if we have published many different works, some of them monographic works, focused on this particular issue. Now, let me finish because I don't want to talk for too long. But I would just like to take stock of what we've achieved over the years. I think that we can look back with satisfaction on what we've achieved. We can't deny it. Here we are. This is in the last social forum. I think that is very telling in and of itself. With the situation of the prisoners, the situation has improved, and this is really important to foster their reintegration. And reintegration is stated in Spanish law as one of the aims of the prison system. Families no longer have to put up with that unsustainable situation of having to travel so far to see their relatives. Now, despite some obstacles set in the path by the Public Prosecutor's Office, etc., we are moving forward little by little. And all the prisoners who have been granted a day pass, there's been no problem at all. They've all gone back. No one's escaped. It's all been Fine. So this is moving forward. So what do we need to do? We need to totally deactivate the exceptional prison policy that is being applied still. We need to have apply the normal law to permissions, day passes, to the different regimes under which the prisoners are held. And we need to continue with this proactive attitude. Any prisoner, not just political prisoners, but any prisoner who wants to achieve reintegration needs to adopt a proactive attitude. So the prisoners also need to maintain this proactive attitude that they have had until now, because this will affect their trajectory through the prison system. We've talked about the difficulties. We've talked about the lobbies who are working hard to block this progress. I think the only thing that they're going to achieve is they're only going to be able to slow it up. They won't be able to stop it, these lobbies. I think that we've reached the point of no return, and sooner or later they will have no choice but to recognize the new reality. And I think that the attitude adopted by the Public Prosecutor's Office is very important, and I think they need to understand the need to apply the ordinary law rather than the exceptional legislation. Dialogue, consensus, these continue to be key issues. And we need to, as I said, deactivate the exceptional legislation that is being applied. And finally, we can't forget one issue that is still pending. And that is the issue of those who are living in exile and those who have been deported. We're still working on that. And I think this is one of the pending issues. So we still have to resolve. We have to continue working on that. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you very much. Aitzol Church, the floor is yours. So, tell us about your experience. I do apologize. I don't think his microphone is on. We can't hear what he is saying, unfortunately. We do apologize, but his microphone doesn't seem to be working. If somebody could perhaps turn his microphone on, then we will be able to interpret what he is saying.
Thanks very much for inviting me to participate. I won't take the floor in Basque. I'll do so in French. The National Anti-Terrorist Prosecutor's Office requested that Béatrice Moll-Aran and myself would be tried for the so-called Luosoa operation. And this trial could take place this very year. 3 people that are not here in the room were present at the time. Michel Bergoingan, Michel Bergoingan, and Michel Toubianum. A round of applause for them.
Nous nous sommes impliqués ensemble d'une manière très particulière.
From the very beginning, when we started getting involved, we were aware already from the very, very beginning of what could happen. And we understood that we were going to be arrested and perhaps judged and put before a court for this involvement. Our analysis of the situation at that moment in time made us believe that what we were doing then was not only legitimate, we were truly convinced that we would enjoy the support of the vast majority of the northern Basque country, and we thought we would enjoy the support of politicians. The attitude, however, of the French and Spanish states was impossible to understand because they were preventing an organization who wanted to disarm from doing so. And for example, what they did was decided to arrest the militants in charge of the inventory and of sealing the arsenal. This attitude was impossible to understand, and it had very dangerous consequences as well. It was fueling the sectors that were against the end of the armed struggle. It was humiliating the rival, and therefore it made a future revenge desire inevitable, not to mention who could stumble upon those hideouts of weapons and explosives. The population of the northern Basque Country, the elected representatives, easily understood our gesture, our initiative. We were known as non-violent activists. We were against ETA's strategy. We had applauded its decision to put an end to the armed struggle. We had discussed what our philosophy was, what our goals were. We had been very open. And what we were doing was basically what the states should have done, France and Spain, what they should have started to do 5 years earlier, since the day ETA declared its ceasefire. What we did was basically contact ETA, discuss with them the different options for a dignified, secure, and orderly disarmament, and we tried to support this disarmament and the path towards full disarmament. The work carried out by Baqueridea, the Social Forum, the Bajan Declaration, and the Paris Conference. Everything that had happened, the repeated calls by the politicians to governments so that they would become involved in the peace process, and our belonging to the militant networks, not only in the Basque Country but throughout France, well, made us think that we would enjoy broad support and immediate support. The conversations we held during 2016 with ETA had allowed us to very clearly set out the terms of the agreement, an agreement that both parties had put in writing. And in both the text and the letters that had been made public on the evening of our arrest in Luosoa, these agreements were scrupulously respected and abided by the two signatories. In October and November 2016, ETA declared its willingness to hand over its arms, weapons to the Basque Country civil society so that these could be destroyed, and this in collaboration with international stakeholders. The organization deemed that it was necessary to seek the engagement and the support of the Basque institutions. They were also going to ask the International Verification Commission to broaden the scope of its mission so that it would engage this commission in the monitoring of the disarmament process that was in the making. And we ourselves undertook to promote the necessary contacts with representatives of the civil society and of the different institutions in the Basque Country, as well as a series of international stakeholders. And we wanted to explore the possibilities for the participation of the two states in order to order and secure this process. We took on the political and technical responsibility of the disarmament. We were committed to do so in such a way that we would not fuel a narrative of winners and losers. The idea was to avoid this narrative because this only leads to a feeling of revenge. We wanted to contribute to a truly sustainable and satisfying process. We were committing to seeing this disarmament process happen, and we thought that our initiative would be participatory, politically plural, that it would be a way of working that would be participatory and that would allow us to meet our goals, i.e. 100% disarmament. And we also wanted to carry out other initiatives aimed at achieving global and total peace. When we were arrested in Lozoa and we were put into custody, we were convinced that we had to continue working, continue with our struggle. And we thought that we would be able to trigger a new way of working that would improve the situation of the Basque Country and pave the way towards long-lasting peace. And Laos was a turning point. There was a before and an after. Things changed. It rocked the foundations. And in less than 4 months, the disarmament was settled in a way that did not open additional wounds, that didn't create new hatreds nor a desire for revenge. ETA announced its disbanding, its dissolution. And the way the two states had been handling the situation since 2011 was impossible to understand. And had we continued with their approach, we would have, needed many more years for this disarmament to take place. So, in hindsight, I believe that we were very successful. We were able to lay the foundations for a new way of peacefully coexistence. For the first time, Paris understood that it had to engage. And thanks to this new approach, we were able to open up a process that was able to run smoothly between as of April 2017, we started to engage in contacts with everybody in France, in the southern Basque Country. We engaged in conversations with the different political parties, the trade unions, institutions, the social forum as well, who helped us a great deal, gave us its support and guidance, and this allowed us to work towards a full disarmament. The total disarmament was also possible thanks to the support of the French states. And all this happened under the supervision of the International Verification Committee, the president of the Basque Country Urban Community, and also the support of Pastor Harold Good and Cardinal Mario Zuppi, head of the Sant'Egidio community and current chair of the Italian Episcopal Conference. The 20 people that were present in Bayonne on the day of the disarmament, the 8th of April 2017, these 20,000 people reflected something that was very important. Civil society was no longer a spectator, a passive observer, often a desperate passive observer, and now had transitioned towards a more active role. And this gave a new dimension to peace building. This was a historic gesture made on behalf of the Basque people. No one should ever again claim this legitimacy to justify a return to violence. And so civil society called upon the two states and basically asked them, now what steps are you willing to take? What are you willing to do now at this point in order to contribute to this long-lasting peace that the Basques are calling for? In July 2017, our delegation made up of members of the French government, members of the Northern Basque Country, Artisans of Peace, Bakebi decided to create the first official framework for discussion in order to discuss all the issues pertaining to Basque prisoners. That's when we started to provide a response to the needs of prisoners. And afterwards, further steps were taken because nobody can believe that the prospect of Basque prisoners being incarcerated until 2040 or even longer in a state where some Gaul leaders sentenced to 75 years in prison have already been released after only serving 3 or 4 years. No one can understand that this prospect can fuel anything other than a feeling of injustice and resentment from which no one will come out a winner. Thanks very much, Church. Thanks very much indeed for your insights. Chemi? You have the floor, Chemi. I'm going to be talking not only about Navarre. Since it's the last social forum, I'd like to summarize the work done and the memory working group. I need to take stock now on the work done over the past years to promote the construction of a critical and inclusive memory that is respectful of all narratives and that allows us to overcome the battle of narratives. In order not to expand too much, I would like to read a text. In this space of critical, inclusive memory, which is the most sensitive one, we can observe that we are already transitioning towards a space of construction, leaving little by little behind that space of confrontation in which the battle of narratives kept memory kidnapped. That narrative of winners and losers. Now, I will summarize the progress made since the moment the permanent social forum started working, as well as the tasks that still are pending. Secondly, in my presentation, I will briefly share the 10 recommendations that we tabled in Donosti on the 17th of December of 2022. And last, I'll explain to you the road traveled till we reach these recommendations. As regards the progress made, I'd like to underscore 5. First, the promotion of that single narrative is obsolete, has been exhausted. Within closed doors, all stakeholders acknowledge that memory has to be multifaceted. And to the outside, in the outer world, we see the signals out there, the most relevant of which, as mentioned in Iruña, is the Begiradak document promoted by the Basque government and drafted by 3 victims, 3 historians, in which people and that are extremely different agree on the fact that we're never going to agree on why it happened. Second, memory needs to be inclusive. Exclusions are the seed of future conflicts. It's difficult to analyze the past with the stare of the present, and that's why it's very important to analyze the setting, the context in which things happen. Fourth, all the narratives must be expressed, must be shared, but the red line is that the gaze, the stare, needs to be critical with what happened and which each one's responsibility. We cannot accept those self-justifying narratives as we are seeing. And last, another milestone is that, of course, narrative is not equivalent to memory nor to history. We need to establish or make a distinction between these concepts. This will help us move forward. As for those pending tests, I'd like to underscore 3. First, our generation needs to address these issues. We cannot leave this to the next generation. Second, there is risk, the risk of oblivion. And this risk is being fueled because of how this issue is being publicly dealt with. We see that the confrontational approach, it won't help us move forward. We cannot turn a page fast, and we cannot, remain stagnated in this battle of narratives. We are a society that is changing. We won't agree on why things happen, but we need to lay the groundwork of the future we want to build. It's obvious as evidence that we still lack a resolution framework, and this framework will not only depend on our recommendations, but of the political will of the political parties that need to set out some basic criteria. And it's true that the current electoral cycle, it won't help us. There are some stakeholders that are lobbying here in order to condition this resolution framework, this budding resolution framework. And I like to underscore the polarization of the political debate in Madrid. And in the second part of my presentation, I'll expand on the recommendations issued in Donosti on the 17th of December 2022. Listening needs to be the starting point to start building memory. We need to listen to each other with open minds, with respect, with attention, aware of the importance of open and honest dialogue. Second, there's a need to build memories for peace, to the benefit of peace, and not war narratives. We recommend that we abandon all intention of imposing one single narrative. As we've seen, this only generates further frustration, confrontation, social and political tension, and this is very dangerous at this time when we have great polarization. Third recommendation, memory needs to be multifaceted. We need to add up individual memories and collective memories. We need to make sure that the combination of individual and collective memories is acknowledged. The different micro-narratives should contribute to a plurality of memories. Fourth, memory needs to be self-critical. We recommend that in order for these memories to be effective, to make sure that what has happened never happens again, these memories made up of suffering and pain, of painful events, includes self-criticism. Memory, of course, cannot be indifferent to context. We believe that we need to analyze the acts of harm, the consequences thereof, the pain caused, in the context, in the setting where these events took place. Sixth, memory needs to be necessarily inclusive. We need to build an inclusive narrative that describes what happened, encompassing all the different views, so that those that access this narrative can build their own opinion and can contribute to laying the groundwork towards non-repetition. Seventh, memory cannot be confused with history nor with the narrative. We recommend, based on our experience of the past years, to make a distinction between memory and history. Memory is built based on dialogue. We recommend, therefore, that we promote encounters, processes among different individuals in order to consolidate dialogue as a daily practice in societies in a situation of conflict, in order to engage to more nurturing relationships based on diversity. Ninth, victims need to be at the very center of these memory processes. All victims need to be placed at the very center and play a central role in these processes. And 10th, the goal of memory must be to lay the groundwork for non-repetition. We recommend that guaranteeing these rights is a working line of memory, so that we as a society can contribute to democratic, peaceful coexistence. And last, I'd like to explain how we have reached these recommendations. In October 2020, we started working on these recommendations with a collective and participatory discussion in order to reflect ambitiously on a series of issues that we described as follows: social commitment for democratic, peaceful coexistence. One of the goals was to reflect on how to address the legacy of the past and the painful human consequences of the recent cycle of violence, so that future generations are not trapped by these nor their consequences. This process came to an end a year later in November 2021, and was then conveyed on a total of 30 articles, 8 roundtables, a mailbox to receive comments. We organized many meetings with social agents, and we organized a presentation of conclusions in which we invited Ernesto Samper, former president of Colombia. And as you may recall, we published the so-called process book. And you can also remember those meetings in the Parliament of Navarre. In 2026, the Permanent Social Forum was set up, and we had a first appearance before the Parliament. We wanted institutions to recognize our forum. I won't expand much further because we don't have time. I like to mention another landmark, which is that of the unlikely dialogues. We wanted to have calm, serene dialogues in which we showed respect to the different narratives. A total of 6 encounters have taken place with the participation of people with different backgrounds, different experiences, sometimes opposing experiences, people that have discussed what happened and have reflected on the future. During our first stage, we wanted to learn from international experiences. We were able to listen to ex-combatants of Boko Haram in Cameroon, and we also engaged in a dialogue with a former combatant of the FARC in Colombia, and also a former Navy captain from Colombia. We also had the chance of listening to a member of the IRA, former member of the police of the North of Ireland, and a former member of the UK Navy. And during the second phase, we organized 3 round tables in Bilbao, Iruña, and Gasteiz. And I'd also like to mention the so-called discrete dialogues, that have enjoyed the participation of former members of ETA, also peace activists, trade union leaders, feminists, members of the scholarly world, and people that held institutional positions. And the first of these discrete dialogues was titled Forum of Narratives, and it took place in the southern Basque country. There was a total of 11 people participating. This event was chaired by Nerea Bilbatua from the British NGO Conciliation Resources. They had to meet online because of the pandemic. The group decided not to make the experience public, and Nerea Bilbatua, the facilitator, and Eneco decided to write an article sharing the experience. The second and most recent discrete dialogue was titled Dialogue of Memories. This dialogue took place or has taken place during a period of 13 months with an initial group of 12 people, and then this number was winded down to 9. In this case, the facilitator was Íñigo Retolaza from Guernica, Gogoratuz. And this group decided to organize a presentation in the Commission of Citizen Relations of the Parliament of Navarre. And they also gave an interview to the Diario Noticias, an interview that was published on the 4th of December. And last week, they put an end to their process, sharing their experience in a meeting where civil society was invited to participate. A total of 40 people attended. And this last process that I have witnessed myself was very, very enriching. We could devote a conference just to this process. It was extremely interesting. And I can tell you that as opposed to what we see in society, where we see a great deal of confrontation, of aggressive language, but here what we had was something completely different. And I'd like to finish off by sharing 3 ideas. First, this idea of a single narrative is exhausted, is obsolete. Memory needs to be inclusive, and all narratives need to be expressed without self-justification. And now, seeing how much we've progressed and seeing that we have pending tasks, is this space enough for us to move towards a brighter future? Our answer is yes, certainly it's possible. Thank you.
Bueno, eta, orain, Mariluz, zurea da hitza.
Mariluz, please go ahead. Could you share your experience as a member of the feminist working group of the Permanent Social Forum? I'm going to talk on behalf of the Feminist Working Group. We have several members of this group here in the room. Good morning, everybody. In 2017, our working group was created. Initially, it was called Gogo Eta Vide, but we have called it Feminist Working Group or Gender Working Group. I'd like to start off by saying that our task to contribute to peace building didn't start from scratch. Need to understand that the feminist movement had already been working very hard for quite a number of years to contribute to peace building. The OUCHA platform was created, and we can find the origin of our efforts there. And I'd also like to mention that in 2016, the Basque Public University created EH Ogune, a plural platform. And I'd also like to mention the Kalera initiative that also contributed to our efforts. So different organizations have been working hard. EGOA, Bilbune Feminista, Emakunde, Argituz, Mugarik Gabe. These are all organizations that have launched a wealth of initiatives. And I wanted to underscore their efforts. We're very grateful to the Social Forum. And we started working thanks to the Social Forum. We have carried out a feminist role. And we've had a twofold goal. On the one hand, we have participated in the activities of the Social Forum, making our contribution. And this, for us, has been very important. And as I mentioned, our role was twofold. The second role was to serve as a bridge with feminist movements in Euskal Herria. We wanted to mainstream feminism in the resolution of the past conflict and the peace-building process. In some sectors, this bridge already existed, but not in others. And people from different backgrounds, activists and different kind of organizations. We have all been working hard and uniting. And in 2017, we organized the first event titled I Believe You. I Do Believe You, that was held in Solocoetxe, Bilbao. And it can be considered a success. And then we started paving the way and defining our roadmap. And we decided that it was very important to address all forms of violence. We wanted to address them on equal terms. Sexual violence, torture, gender-based violence. And we had witnesses and representatives that shared with us their testimonies. And we've always worked on two axes. On the one hand, we have participated in all the events organized by the Social Forum, all the activities. On the other hand, we have organized independent events. When we have participated in the Social Forum, we've organized a series of events. For example, in 2018 in Ficoma, we addressed the issue of Basque prisoners, exiles, fugitives. And we said that when we talk about these issues, it's very important to consider the gender perspective. We have tried to mainstream gender in these discussions. And subsequently, we've been working hard to promote the social commitment in this road towards reconciliation. And when we talk about a democratic, peaceful coexistence, of course, we need to talk about conflicts. Everything is intertwined, is closely related. We need to promote a different political culture in the Basque Country, a culture that we lack and that we need to build together.
To give you another example, we also contributed to the issue of torture, talking about torture suffered by women and being critical and self-critical in all this. When we talk about women's torture, or torture perpetrated against women, what we try to do is to bring women to the meeting so that they can give their testimonies. There are moments in which it's important to have eyewitness statements and declarations, but I think we have to move away from that a little bit and just meet these people so that they can tell us how they have coped with this experiences, what tools they've used, what do they learn from these experiences, and integrate these people in the processes that we carry out with other stakeholders, not just call them so that they can come and tell us what happened to them, to relive the awful events. Let me just give you 3 examples. In 2009, we created a process called Feminist justice under debate, because we thought that it was important for us to talk about feminist justice. This is the umbrella of everything that covers everything that we do today. It's not just peace process, conflict resolution, but it's also feminist justice. This is what we do. We believe it was important for feminists to get together in order to define what feminist justice is. We don't really know what that is yet. We haven't come to a definition, but we did want to make a contribution to this field. We held a conference which over 100 feminists attended to think about all of these different issues. And in November of that same year, we held the 5th feminist conference in Durango. I'm sure that those of you here will remember this conference, and we specifically focused on the issue of feminist justice because we were interested in hearing what other people had to say about this issue. We understand that there was a series of claims, that the series of demands that we needed to make. For example, we are clear that our justice system is very much focused on the aggressor, on the perpetrator, and has a kind of punitive attitude towards perpetrators. And we believe that from our perspective, it's important to focus also on the victim, but not just the victim, him or herself, but on the whole community. We need to adopt a different perspective, a broader perspective, and this is where we believe we can contribute today. We've talked a lot about the new law in Spain called Only Yes is Yes. This is a law against gender-based violence. We agree with that law because we don't want to adopt a punitive attitude, although we're still struggling to understand exactly what it's trying to do. But I do believe that we're at the forefront of feminism and the feminist movement in our attitude. And if we go back to this group rape that was perpetrated some years ago in the San Fermin festivals, I think our position on that and our stance on that is very, very clear. We need to involve all of society in all this. And another framework for our work has been the fact that we believe that it's important to compare within the context of the Basque conflict and the different contexts within feminism. We need to compare and to contrast these different violences, these different experiences. We've carried out this exercise of comparison, and it's been really useful because it's helped us to understand the different postures that are adopted in both, and sometimes they're quite contradictory. Often what we propose for one case is different from what we propose for another one, so it's actually been quite interesting and very enriching for the feminist movement, but also from a social point of view. I believe this is a very interesting exercise. I mean, I think we could all benefit from carrying out a similar exercise. And then when the pandemic hit, we thought, well, what can we do in this new context? And what we decided to do was to carry out a case analysis. We believe that here we have a lot of experiences about different cases. We have protocols here, there, and everywhere. We've got a lot of guidelines that have been established. But what we were lacking was to actually use all that to develop a new model. This is currently ongoing, this work. We analysed 3 different cases from different contexts. Some were more closely related to the political conflict, others more related to sexual violence, and it was a very interesting exercise for us because we tend to attach more importance to processes than to public events, and this process has been one of our key things that we've done. To give you an idea of what we've done, we understand that there's a moment at which a punishment has to finish, and so how can we re-socialize that person? Now, these are issues that we believe we need to deal with, we need to work on. We have carried out a process of reflection, and we come up with some conclusions which I believe are interesting and are influenced by this work that we are carrying out, comparing different cases. We've also fostered different processes in different regions of the Basque Country. We have collaborated with other regions as well. And from 2022 onwards, what have we been doing? Well, what are we doing at the moment? Well, we continue to work, and we believe we're aware of that the context has changed, not just with regard to the conflict, but also in relation to feminism. Feminism at the moment is very much focused on care, on racism, and this is a major change. And we believe that these issues need to be taken into account as well as the issues that we have been working on at the Social Forum. I think that in general we can feel satisfied with what we've done. When a feminist is asked to become involved in a mixed process, it almost seems like feminism is something, like an add-on. It's a parallel process. It's a bit of a plug-in. It's not central to the process. We're sort of like an accessory to this common ground that people are trying to build. Feminism, it doesn't ever seem to be central to any project. So it's a bit of a bittersweet conclusion that we've come to, because we are involved, but it's not as cross-cutting as we would like. It's not as mainstream as we would like. But we will continue to work, and we will continue to carry out this, what we're doing, because the seed of feminist justice has been sown, and we understand that it's difficult to involve all society and all stakeholders from a feminist perspective, but we will continue to try to do that. And thank you to the Forum for giving me the opportunity to explain what we've been doing.
Galderetarako tartea bukatu zaigu, ez dugu.
Well, we don't have time for questions, unfortunately, because we're running late. So we're going to conclude this very interesting panel debate, or series of addresses. I would just like to say that it's really interesting for us to see what's been done from the different areas of the Social Forum. But behind all of this, we have people who are incredibly committed, who have really worked on their own empathy, who have managed to put themselves in other people's shoes, who've worked on issues from a multiple different perspectives. So you and the people who are here today, you have done this work. This work has been done with you, and I would like to thank you for your hard work and say that it has been a pleasure to be here with you. It's been a pleasure also to be able to collaborate with all of you. So we're going to give the floor now to Eneko. I think we're going to have to cut the coffee break short, but thank you all very much for your kind addresses. Thank you very much.
Bueno, eskerrik asko, vista así en perspectiva y con una pandemia.
Thank you very much. Well, all the things that have been done over the last 7 years, and with a pandemic, right bang in the middle of it. So well done. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our interpreters and our interpreting team who are helping us to understand each other. As Tasio said, we now have a short coffee break, and we will come back at 12 o'clock in just 20 minutes in order to commence with the closing ceremony of the forum. And could I just ask all of you in the first few rows, we would like you to please just leave these chairs free, because we have a bit of a protocol event happening after the coffee break.
Jaun Andreok, eguerdion.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Mr. Deputy Regional Minister for Human Rights, Memory and Cooperation, José Antonio Ranz, Director of Human Rights, Victims and Diversity, members of the Basque Parliament, representatives of political parties, Secretaries General of trade unions and other social partners and friends. Welcome. Welcome once again. Welcome to this closing ceremony of the 6th and final Social Forum. Now, first of all, I would ask you all to stand for a moment to pay a heartfelt tribute to all victims of all expressions of violence, a tribute that will be accompanied by Iñaut Ziluzarreta on the cello.
Eskerrik asko.
Thank you very much, Iñaut. Now, we wanted this last social forum to coincide with the first one held 10 years ago on the 14th and the 15th of March in Bilbao and Pamplona, a milestone which, with hindsight, has proven to be decisive. The social forums promoted by Lokarri and Bakebidea were born out of civil society with the aim of contributing to the resolution of the conflict and mitigating its consequences. During that first social forum in March 2013, a comprehensive roadmap was created with 12 recommendations to build this unique process of ours. The Permanent Social Forum subsequently adopted this roadmap. On the 21st of January, as stated in the statement that we read in Durango, if we look at the 12 recommendations presented at the 2013 Social Forum and the mission defined by the Permanent Social Forum in 2016, we see that 11 of those 12 recommendations have since been fulfilled or are currently being implemented. ETA's civilian disarmament and disbandment was completed in 2017 and 2018 within the international DDR, disarmament, demobilization and reintegration parameters defined by the UN. In 2021, the issue of ongi etorris was finally resolved. In 2022, the consensus on the right of all victims to truth, justice and reparation began to take shape. And finally, once all the prisoners are serving their sentences in the prisons of Zaballa, Basauri, Martutene and Iruña Pamplona, the framework of resolution for them will also be defined. In addition to the participation of civil society throughout this process, and the accompaniment of various social, trade union, political and institutional stakeholders, many of whom are here present today, our process has also enjoyed the important participation of the international community, which is why today we've invited Brian Curran to speak a few words. Brian Curran is a South African lawyer specialising in civil rights and human rights and mediation, and who has been involved from the beginning in the Basque process. He was instrumental in promoting the Brussels Declaration, was a member of the International Contact Group, and participated in the organisation of the Ayete Conference in 2011. Unfortunately, he's unable to be here in person, but he has sent us a video.
Greetings to all my friends and colleagues in the Basque Country, and in particular today, the Social Forum. I wish I could be there with all of you. Unfortunately, it's not present, and therefore the best I can do is to speak to you virtually. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be present, at least in this form. Between 2007 and 2017, the conflict resolution process that finally brought peace to the Basque Country has been internationally recognized as unique. Unique in the sense that it was, ever since the Madrid Barajas airport bombing on 30 December 2006, unilateral. As we know, the Spanish government's official position on the conflict in the Basque Country was that it is not a political conflict. Madrid referred to ETA as a band of criminals and terrorists, and included as ETA all Abertzale left who would not condemn ETA, including those who had themselves neither committed acts of violence nor promoted violence, with the result that the Abertzale left, represented then by Batasuna, was banned and excluded from participation in the formal political process. The resolution from Madrid's perspective was that unconditional cessation of ETA violence and the handing over of weapons to Spanish security forces and the surrender of ETA volunteers and the dissolution of ETA was the only solution. On the other hand, from the perspective of the Abertzale left, the post-Franco-Spanish Constitution of 1978 violates the cultural, social, civil, and political rights of the Basque Country, in that it denies them the right to self-determination. The Abertzale left sought a political resolution, whereas Madrid's response was that Spain is a constitutional democracy and that the status of the Basque Country as an autonomous community is the product of that constitution, which government neither has, that is the Spanish government, neither has the need nor a mandate to change. In summary, a security resolution versus a negotiated resolution, in respect of which there appeared to be no unmovable deadlock. This deadlock was, as we know, exacerbated by ETA's refusal to permanently end its armed struggle, which provided justification in the eyes of the international community to the Spanish government's refusal to negotiate with Abertzale left. When it became evident that Madrid would not be an active partner in the Basque peace process. You, the Basque people, took the unprecedented step of proceeding nevertheless unilaterally. I remind us of what appeared to be an irretractable deadlock, incapable of any resolution, not because I want the Basque people to dwell on that, but rather to remind you from whence you have come and to highlight your remarkable achievements in conflict transformation, in bringing peace to the Basque country, against all expectations and against all odds. To celebrate those achievements, not in the context of today, but rather in the context of your painful history. Not to be misunderstood, I am now speaking to all the people of the Basque country, irrespective of political persuasion. Those who purposefully, and also those who unknowingly and unintentionally, directly or indirectly contributed in some way to this new era of inclusive politics rather than exclusive politics, to tolerance and to respect rather than arrogance, to peace rather than violence. My message to those who might interpret the outcome of the peace process as a victory, see it not as a victory for one side, namely to your side, but rather see it as a victory for the process and a victory for peace. Where long-term peace is victorious over violence, there are only winners. There are no losers. In conclusion, I wish to express my gratitude to the many people of the Basque country from the different political persuasions for your friendship, for your support over many years, all those years that I spent working with you. And that really goes back to 2004 and ended more than 10 years later. The years that I spent in the Basque country, one of the most beautiful places in the world, really gave me a sense of how much there was for you to lose if peace was not found. And that certainly inspired me to work as hard as I possibly could in collaboration with all of you. And many of those with whom I collaborated were not necessarily supporters of what I was doing when I first began to work in your country. But as the years progressed, certainly I got the sense that we were able to work together. And when I say we, I mean not those who initially brought me to the Basque country, but those, I think, who initially resisted my involvement and my participation. A final word to the social forum. You picked up where the group that I was involved with, the International Contact Group for the Basque Country, left off. It was absolutely critical that the peace process would be taken to its final conclusion by the Basque people, not by outsiders. And certainly the social forum, I know well, excelled in doing that. You moved the peace process forward on an ongoing basis. You brought it to that final conclusion when eventually ETA did dissolve as an organization. And since then, I'm aware that you have worked ceaselessly to achieve reconciliation. That in itself is not an end. Reconciliation takes many, many years. It's a process that is ongoing. And with your final forum today, the final session today, I have absolute confidence that the legacy that you will be leaving behind will be a legacy for peace and for reconciliation. And at community levels throughout many towns and villages, smaller initiatives will continue with your good work. And I'm hopeful that in the final analysis, there will be peace throughout the Basque country. I thank you.
Mila esker, Brian, atzo bai Iruñan, Christian eta Veronikekin.
Thank you very much, Brian. Now, as you know, we heard from Christian and Veronique yesterday, and we know how important it was, how important the involvement of the international community was in all of this. Now, this is not just the closing event of the Sixth Social Forum, it is also the last public event of the Permanent Social Forum. It's a farewell. And I think it's been made very clear this morning and yesterday that the peace-building process is still unfinished. There's still a long way to go. There are still tasks pending, as in fact, this is something that we've said many times this week. And the mayor of San Sebastian this morning said and reminded us that peace is a garden that must be watered every day and by all of society. And if the final aim, the ultimate aim that brings us all here today is to generate the conditions for non-repetition, so that we can tackle the tasks still pending, then doing this together will help us to face the greatest challenge of all, agreeing on a shared future by learning lessons from our recent past. So, as we said before, one era is coming to an end and another is just beginning. It's a new era with new challenges. And it's a phase that will start definitively in the summer of 2024 when the autonomous elections in the Basque Autonomous Community will bring the current electoral cycle to a close. So, to finish, we will listen to Nekane Alcelay and Agus Hernan, who will take stock of some of the lessons that we've all learned over the last 7 years. So, Agus and Nekane, the floor is all yours.
Foro soziala duela 10 urte lanean hasi zenean oso egoera zailean geun.
We started work 10 years ago when we were in a very, very difficult situation. We've come a long way over the last few years. It's been a difficult road, but it has been a very fruitful road nonetheless. We have held 6 social forums and also the international conference in Ayete, of which we're today celebrating the 10th anniversary. And in all these meetings, we've identified our main challenges. There were issues that we thought would be impossible to resolve, but in fact, we have made headway. For example, ETA's disarmament and dissolution. And also, we've improved with regard to prisoners, victims, reparation, and also in the process of social reconciliation. There's still a lot of work left to be done in many different areas, and we need to work on different areas of reconciliation. We have to reconstruct the framework of reconciliation as well. That's another task that is pending. We need to put an end to discrimination, which continues to exist in the way that victims are treated and in relation to their right to truth justice and reconciliation. It's important to get rid of the exceptional legislation which is still applied to political prisoners and imply instead the normal legislation which will enable their reintegration. It's also important to foster a critical and inclusive narrative that will include all narratives and to put an end to the battle of the narratives. All of these important issues will help us lay the groundwork for building democratic, peaceful coexistence, which is based in respect for all political and civil rights of all people everywhere. Even though it might seem difficult to sum up the process that we have gone through over the last 7 years, we believe that there are actually 12 lessons that we can learn from everything that has happened, and this will help us to serve as a springboard towards the future. The first lesson that we have learned: the contribution made by victims. If it weren't for the contribution of victims, if it hadn't been for their generosity, for everything that they have contributed to the process and their commitment, the process would have been absolutely impossible. It would have been impossible for us to be able to overcome all the discrimination that they have suffered. We need to move towards a world in which there is no division between victims. Second lesson: the special peace-building process. I think it's clear that our peace process is not based on processes of negotiation. I think that's fairly clear. But in order to build peace in our process, we have taken a number of steps forward, always taking as a benchmark different conflicts and international standards. Third lesson: the mission of civil society and the role of civil society. Often, civil society has been the oil that has helped an engine that kept seizing up to keep going. They've helped us to overcome situations of deadlock. In all of these situations, civil society has taken a leadership role and has played a key role in overcoming these. We have 12 main recommendations, and then we have the testimony of the victims. These are the basis for peaceful coexistence, and we also have very specific recommendations. And thanks to all of that, we are now moving towards a situation which was absolutely impossible to imagine some years ago. Issues which are now, in fact, being included in political agendas, media agendas, despite the fact that we have had a very difficult times with the pandemic.
This process would have been even harder without the support of the international community. They played an essential role in paving the way towards the Ayete conference in the 2012-2016 period, and they also contributed to the dissolution of ETA and to the disarmament. They have been very much engaged in the process all throughout. Fifth, the International Conference and the Ayete Conference. The International Ayete Conference, chaired by Kofi Annan, and the declaration, made the best people hopeful about the possibility of contributing to a future of peace. The Ayete declaration is a milestone, and it's a reference that will guide us through those challenges that will help us navigate the hurdles. 6, unilateral initiatives in our process have opened up new windows of opportunity, have helped us build consensus to generate multilateral ways of working. We have been able to create the necessary conditions to continue making headway. Some political stakeholders have understood their participation as a commitment with society, instead of thinking in terms of quid pro quo, instead of thinking in their own interests. And we have been able to move forward in spite of the position of some stakeholders. We have been able to create new opportunities for prisoners as well. We've been able to forge multi-stakeholder alliances with trade unions, with political parties, with social stakeholders, and thanks to this, the headway is irreversible. There's no way back. Seventh, principle of reality. This is a distinctive feature of the role of civil society. Civil society has played a central role, and this process has been very much anchored on reality. Society has considered our recommendations and has helped us overcome some very negative attitudes that prevented progress. Eighth, we need to connect with this idea of the central lane. It has been a priority for us to find a path that would help us connect with the vast majority of society. Thanks to this principle of the central lane, we knew where the public opinion stood, and we didn't only consider the perspective conveyed by the media. Eighth, we wanted to build spaces of trust. The trade unions, the institutions have been engaged in this process, have built ties, and have created a very sustainable and a robust ecosystem. An ecosystem anchored or leveraged on dialogue. Dialogue has been of the essence. Consensus is weaved little by little, with fine threads, overcoming clashes and confrontations. We can use that metaphor of ladders. We see that the steps are those micro agreements that help us go up the ladder and reach our goals. 11th, gender perspective. We've made we've introduced the gender perspective, and this has helped us build new scenarios and leave behind heteropatriarchal views. 12, the perseverance, the determination, the creativity have been very important. Many times we wanted to, give up. We felt very frustrated. There was a great deal of frustration, but in Locarre, we decided to leave this ahead. We've persevered, and perseverance has been perhaps one of the virtues that have helped us take steps forward. Creativity as well, to envisage new instruments. This has been one of the distinctive features of the social forum that I'd like to underscore as well. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Bueno.
Well, with this last reading by Nick Cane and Agus, with those learnings that stem from the last 7 years of work of the Permanent Social Forum, we reach the end of this journey. And it's my turn to say farewell. Daunting task. I remember that in this meeting with civil society in Iruña on the 18th of February to take stock on the outcomes of the social forum, one attendee said that with the forum's decision to close this stage, he felt this sense of orphanhood, and I can identify with this feeling. Each of those that have participated in this process have gone through a process of mourning. And if you allow me, I'll skip the protocol that has characterized the social forum events. I'd like to share with you what I felt over the past days. I'd like to share with you my feelings. I like to speak the hand of my heart. And I'm sure that I'm also, reaching out to many people. I remember the day when I joined the Permanent Social Forum. I come from a development corporation NGO based in Madrid. This is an organization that, even though it's a leftist organization, did understand the historic, social, and political context of the Basque Country. Initially, my participation in this project was a personal commitment, but now, today, currently, my organization, Paz Continuidad, backs my efforts. And I cannot forget Bayonne, a very important day for me. What happened there was, historical. And that's why I convinced Andy, very removed from these topics, to join me in Bayonne. And when we got to that square, overcrowded square with sweltering heat, I remember what we felt there. It was a very important day for us. And these 7 years of unwavering efforts, this 7 years of commitment wouldn't have been possible without what happened there in Bayonne. I've learned a great deal from those that preceded me in this peace-building efforts. I remember my meetings with Paoli Locarre, my conversations with Susana Arrillo, who passed on her enthusiasm to me, who taught me the takeaways of Gesto por la Paz. I remember my work with Guernica Gogoratuz. I've been thinking about Carmen Galdiano, victim of the GAO these days. Carmen was and is the secretary of the Castola, where I did my studies. And on the 4th of March, at the end of an event on state victims, I gave her a heartfelt embrace and told her, we don't look at each other in the eyes as much as we should. We don't listen to each other as much as we should. Thanks to the forum, I've learned what Carmen went through and also what many other state victims have endured. I've also learned a great deal from the victims of ETA thanks to the encounters organized by the social forum. I remember the meeting organized in the Aranzazu Hotel here in Donosti. I was able to witness firsthand the experiences of Nayara Zamarreño, Josué Lespe, and Gorka Landavori. I had the chance to represent the forum in the act of tribute to Juan María Jauregui, together with Maisabel Lassa and María Jauregui, and I thought I should have supported them and show them my support much earlier. I cannot remain indifferent to those victims, to those prisoners of Echera. I remember that some colleagues from Madrid participated in these meetings with prisoners, and they were also moved by the stories shared in those meetings. There's still a lot to be told, a lot to be said, but I take with me in my heart those people that I've met during this process, many people that participated in the discrete process that kicked off with Nerea Bilbatua in the Basque Autonomous region. I like to thank those people that have trusted me, that have helped me become a better person. I like to thank my colleagues from the Permanent Social Forum. I'm going to mention some of them, not all. And I like to mention those people with whom I've spent more time. I like to highlight the case, the stare of Teresa Toga, with a huge heart, so affectionate, so committed to peace. I can remember Gorka's untimely calls. Can remember the conversations on philosophy and ethics with Miquel. Ainara's fervor when defending her ideas. Isaías' concern about the need to convey what has happened to the new generations. I remember Nekane when she insisted on disseminating what we did at the social forum. I remember how Pello and Jabocha worked to make sure that what we were done was communicated to the press. I have also engaged with Tasio and Patricia. I've missed you so much this last month. As regards to my contribution to the Permanent Social Forum, I've done it all. I've played the violin, I've chaired dialogues, I've written articles for the press. And yesterday, I traveled to Iruña on behalf of the forum, and I felt so welcomed and so supported by my colleagues from Navarre. Thanks very much indeed. And when I woke up this morning, I thought, I'll stop using suits. And when I get back home this afternoon, to change clothes, I would feel very, very satisfied because of my role in contributing to this world. I'll finish up by saying that a good friend of mine told me recently that the Basque society should be grateful to the work done by the Permanent Social Forum over the past years. And that comment made me think, gave me food for thought. And that's why I like to take on the opportunity of being here in front of you to thank and recognize all those institutions, all those individuals that from the Permanent Social Forum have, and we have together promoted each and every of the different initiatives. Without your support, the work that we have done and that was showcased yesterday and that has been showcased today wouldn't have been possible. Thank you very much. I'd also like to express my thanks to the remaining social stakeholders, the politicians, the institutions that have joined us. I'd like to thank the victims. Thanks to your commitment, thanks to your testimonies, you have participated in this process. Thank you very much. Mila esker, as we say in Basque. And last, I cannot close the sixth and last social forum without expressing my thanks to someone who has played a key role during this process. I know that's not good to personalize. I'll probably scold it because he's not going to like what I'm going to say. But I think that he deserves this and represents all the members of this forum. He has been our coordinator. He has been the glue in this process. He has, had us under his wing. He has been perseverant. He has never given up. He has been able to convey hope and enthusiasm. He has helped us forge alliances, weave agreements, build micro-agreements. He has helped us reach consensus. This is a good legacy for what's to come after this Permanent Social Forum. So, for all of this, I'd like to sincerely thank Agus Hernan. But I cannot forget other people that have contributed to the legacy of the Permanent Social Forum. Without the work of many other people, without their work, we wouldn't be better off today than 10 years ago. So I'd like to ask to join me on stage, and I know they're not going to like this idea. I'd like to ask Anais Funosas, chair of Bakea Biden, and Paul Rios, former coordinator of Locari, to please join me on stage. Thanks very much. And I'd like to recognize the work you've done, and in order to give some color to this event, since spring is around the corner, we want to give you these bouquets of flowers. We have Aispea Leteaula and Nekane and Teresa joining me on stage now. And the time has come, ladies, gentlemen, from San Sebastian. The 18th of March, 2023, the Permanent Social Forum says farewell. Thanks very much for supporting us, for being true believers in peace. Thank you very much. See you soon.